on this computer.
Awesome.
Action whenever you're ready.
All right, perfect. All right. So before I begin, it's clear that everyone has some clinical knowledge. So I don't want this to be too redundant. I don't want you to feel like this is remedial for any of you. I do want this to be something that we build off of. It's clear from your prompts, you all know what you're doing for the most part. So we need to build off of this, right? So, and the reason that we're stressing these points is because of a specific amount of statistics that are coming out. So I wanted to stress that between 20 and 57% of therapy clients do not return after the initial session. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about has to do with that. Another 37 to 45% only attend therapy a total of 2 times and then disengage. And a lot of these skills that we're going to be talking about that we kind of want to see you all be able to try and implement in your sessions throughout this weekend and thereafter have to do with that, may have to do with that. So the first thing that we want to see from much of your videos are going to be how you open and close your session. This is really important. Can anyone tell me why it's maybe important how we develop our opening for a session from what you know so far?
I think it's like Dr. Cal was saying, the opening sets the tone for the session, and then the closing is, what the recap, and it's the takeaways that your client is going to remember at the end of the session.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dr. Spinks modeled that perfectly. The way in which we spent this morning so far, establishing the rapport, ensuring safety, creating a safe space so that disclosure can actually happen, right? Also, we also have to think about it from the client's vantage. If someone's coming in for the first time, or if we're put in that situation where we're trying to disclose our deepest, darkest secrets or what it is that we were most insecure about, more than likely we're going to have a little bit of defense or strife in doing that. So establishing a safe space is really important. I think you said that perfectly with regards to, making sure that the opening is really sounded and grounded to create that foundation. Closing is also really important as well. We're going to use specific skills. We're going to try and talk about them as we move forward through this presentation. But just as you mentioned, kind of being able to paraphrase, ask clarifying questions, summarize effectively. We'd never want to be in a situation where we're not kind of watching the clock. And that's not to say that we have to be looking at our wristwatch every 5 minutes, but we do want to know the cadence of our session, right? And so we don't want to ever be in a scenario where 2 minutes are left and we're bum rushing, just trying to close out this session because we know we have another client coming in. So we definitely want to be able to summarize effectively, to give a recap, maybe even start constructing part of our DAP note or our SOAP note in that verbal closing, if you will. So we kind of want to go over the data. We kind of want to go over what we discussed in that session. And we do want to develop a plan so as to set the stage for the next session. The other thing that we might want to be mindful of is that with each progressive session, we're trying to create this weave so as to create like a continuum of care, if you will. So it becomes kind of more of a fluid conversation from one session to the next. And when you write your DAP note, what I used to do in private practice was I would write my DAP notes and I would sequentially order them. And by that, I mean, I would have a date for the first session, and then I would have a date for the next session. And my plan would be in that first note, right? So I would always be able to recap on the plan from the previous session so as to create that continuum that I'm talking about. So that then leads to the next opening, if you will, for the next session. Does that make sense to everyone? So you could be like, okay, well, I'm having this session with this individual. In the summary, we're paraphrasing and summarizing the entire session. Okay, you came in to see me. Again, I come from substance use disorder. So this individual was using for X amount of days and they wanted to talk about triggers, for example. And so part of our plan would then be to establish, okay, we're going to journal. And part of our journaling is going to be to establish some awareness of some specific triggers. And then for our next session, my first question is going to be, oh, okay, so last time we met, we said that we were going to talk about our triggers and try and identify our triggers. Where are we in that progress, right? And that then gives an opening for the client to then disclose, what type of progress was made. Does that make sense? Cool. When it comes to reflecting a feeling, so this is a little bit complex, if you will. What do you all know about reflecting a feeling so far? From our prompts, it sounds like everyone has a solid awareness of it, but what does it mean to you?
I think for me, the reflecting the feeling is just, going off what you see, some of the words they may say, or some of the, the visual things that you may see and how a person is feeling. Because sometimes, which I know with me, I can feel a certain way, but don't show it, or it can show on my face, but I don't say it.
Absolutely. Congruence and incongruence. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there's certain emotions that people are more readily willing to own. And then there are other emotions that either they can't label or find language for. And so that's part of what I think our role is to introduce those beyond like happy, sad, angry, to kind of get them to look at what is really going on beyond that surface.
Definitely. Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, because there is another document that Dr. Spinks uploaded, and this is going to be extremely helpful for when you start meeting with your partner to try and establish what it is that you're going to be doing for your taping. When it comes to reflecting a feeling, being able to kind of start in that step order operation, if you will, of naming the emotion. So most of our clients are going to be having some sort of strife in taking something that's intangible like our emotion and assigning a construct to it, right? Has anyone heard of a feeling wheel by any chance? Yep, Erica. Perfect.
I have it next to me.
Yes, perfect. So feeling wheel is a great tool. I'm sure many of you have experience using it. For those who don't know, it's basically this, it's a wheel that has a bunch of different constructs on it, and they're grouped by specific trigger emotions or specific assigned emotions that lead down this trajectory to feel specific manifestation. And so sometimes we offer this to our clients so that when they experience, or they're recounting an experience, or when they're coming in for a session, they're able to use this to then assign a specific construct to that said emotion, right? And so that gives us a roadmap from which to work from. Going back to Lainey's point, sometimes that emotion is just the precursor to something that's more underlying or more profound. And so reflecting a feeling is kind of asking a specific question or reflecting that specific set emotion to figure out what's going on underneath that. So there's a secondary emotion that we're trying to get to. And doing this process allows for the client to sort of extrapolate on the first emotion to then uncover that second emotion. And forgive me in advance, I work off of case conceptualization, so I'm going to offer a scenario and let me know what you would ask or what you think would be appropriate to ask to uncover the secondary emotion. So I had a case. So say there's an individual that came in for sessions. And again, I'm sorry, I come from the world of co-occurring and substance use, but this individual comes in, he has profound depression, and has been using substances for over a year. His drug of choice is heroin. And in your sessions, he starts disclosing that he has an identical twin. And, he has seen his twin be very successful. His twin has the American dream, is married, has kids, has a dog, white picket fence, house, everything is in order. He, on the other hand, has gone down this trajectory of using for a long period of time. And, in his 6th or 7th session with you, he starts recounting that, every single time he has dinner with his family, he starts feeling really low about himself. And that provokes this trajectory of wanting to go out and use. So if this was your client posed to you, what do you think you would ask? Or let's start with what's the precursor emotion that you think he's endorsing or experiencing? Go ahead, Tina.
I would say shame almost, that he's seeing how successful his twin is being, but then here he is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where he's completely failing not only himself, but his family's expectations, seeing how well his brother's doing.
Perfect. So then what follow-up question would you ask to sort of have him become aware of that potential, visualizing what could have been that success?
I guess I would ask him, maybe if he could describe a time when he felt that he was achieving or possibly at the same level as his brother, and then start from there going to the past of, okay, well then what changed from that point to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And that helps develop your treatment plan essentially. So you're right on the money with that. Absolutely. So this is the reason why we ask these specific questions. So in that scenario, we would start with, okay, so what was it that you were feeling in that specific scenario? That situation, what feeling came up for you? And hopefully the client would be able to identify, given the feelings wheel, potential shame, potential guilt, potential sadness, potential isolation. And then further, we would ask, okay, well, it sounds like you're feeling shame, depressed, isolation, guilt. What does that mean? Like we'll go a little bit deeper with that, and maybe even offer, a lot of you are interested in mindfulness, maybe even offer a moment to just reflect on that sensation, do a breathing exercise and see what else comes up. Because more often than not, the answer is within. And maybe the client would then say, oh, for himself, it's really difficult for me to visualize my twin brother, seeing myself what could have been, be successful. And unfortunately, my situation is such, right? And so much of that is our work, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for when it comes to reflecting a feeling. Granted, not every situation is going to be as profound, not every situation is going to be as deep, but we are trying to strive for that, right? When it comes to our nonverbal skills and encouragers, a lot of the textbooks that we've been using so far have been encouraging us to use qualifiers. And those specific qualifiers, minimal encouragers, would be something like, or tell me more about that. But also, again, folks that were interested in mindfulness, offering a lot of silence and opportunities for silence. I know how many people in the room feel comfortable with silence as we cordially offer silence here.
I've gotten more comfortable with it.
Getting more comfortable with it, right? And so silence is, sometimes we feel like we have this urge that we have to fill the gap, right? We have to hurry up and ask a question or provoke something so that our clients are engaged, right? Or saying something so that we don't necessarily feel awkward. Silence is a really great opportunity for reflection. And sometimes if you sit with it long enough, the client will then start feeling something happens. There's like a magic to it. So that can also be a form of nonverbal communication that our clients would benefit from. But typically our nonverbals, what would you say are cardinal great nonverbal communicative skills that we could use in session?
Nodding.
How about eye contact, right?
Yeah, and even the whole facing somebody and how much on camera you show. I think being mindful of all of those things.
Definitely. I'm happy you're bringing up the camera. So it doesn't seem like this pandemic is going anywhere soon. Telehealth is becoming the new norm. There's legislative action to keep it that way. And so thinking about our nonverbals in application to what we're doing, telehealth, and tying in what Lisa was mentioning earlier with regards to our recording devices and all this tech. Something that's come up in my own group supervision with my own mentors is this vacant space that kind of exists. And so nonverbals are so much more important now in the realm of telehealth because Zoom is great. We have face-to-face interaction, but there's some sort of cognitive thing that happens with this space that's created between my computer and wherever you're sitting, right? And so sometimes that is something that we have to mitigate. So there's a conceptual thing that's happening where, everyone that I'm in supervision with, we are all talking about this vacant space that exists. And sometimes we as counselors feel like we have to overextend to accommodate for that space. And I know that sounds heady, but once you start practicing this, because more than likely in your practicum internship, you may have to do Zoom interactions. And so we need to be mindful of all the tech devices that we have synced up with our laptops. We have to be mindful of Alexa going off on random things that we're saying. And in that, we also have to gauge how we can mitigate all of our distractions and maintain that eye contact, maintain that nonverbal communication, because this is similar to having a conversation with a colleague or a friend and they're on their phone the entire time, not giving you eye contact, not really paying attention, not feeling like you're being received, right? So that sometimes disrupts our rapport. Does that make sense? So being able to, turn off all those devices or silence them, and also know when you're with your client, be able to, ignore all the pop-ups that might come up on your laptop as well, is super important. The other point I wanted to make is that most of our communication is nonverbal. And that's the reason why we're stressing it so much, is that 70% of our communication is going to be nonverbal. The other 30 is actually what we're saying. So this is relevant not only in person, but I think it's ever more so important when we're doing these Zoom telehealth conversations. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about any of that information so far? So we definitely want to be mindful of our nonverbals. This is going to be something that you're going to be graded upon for your videos. We also want to see appropriate use of open and closed-ended questions. Everyone's fully aware of the differences between open and closed-ended questions. Why is it that we're trying to focus so much of our energy on open-ended questions, do you think?
It keeps the client talking. It gives them a chance to, give you more detail and more about their experience.
Absolutely. And so, like, case in point, if I said, are you feeling good today? A yes or no response is not really giving much data to work from. And so the more data that we have to work from, the better our interactions are going to be. Simultaneous with that, it shows interest, so our rapport is established. Simultaneous with that, the more data we have, we can pull from that data to establish our treatment plan. And so those are all cardinal things that we want to kind of see for our videos that we're here using, right? Can anyone tell me what the difference between empathy and care is? There's a nuance between the two.
I think, oh Lord. Sorry.
You're fine.
I think with Karen, that's kind of one of my strengths and weaknesses. I care a lot, even if people hurt me. But with the Karen, you can care for somebody, their situation or, whatever it is they're going through. But empathy is a little bit more how you can somewhat relate, but not relate. You kind of put yourself in their shoes just a little bit, to show that you feel a bit more than what they're going through instead of the caring. I know that probably don't make sense, but
no, that absolutely makes sense. Yeah, definitely. So empathy is kind of sharing the emotion with the client, right? Or with anyone else. Caring is just showing that you're concerned, right? And so much of our work is grounded in empathy. We want to be able to relate to the client in a lot of different ways. And so we want to see that in the videos that you are creating. But this is also where boundaries are really important. When we start taking on more of what the client's feeling than we need to, those are some instances where things like burnout can occur. So we need to be clear with regards to where our boundaries are, how much we're taking on, so as to not feel too much. And that's where it gets a little murky. There's a grayscale that exists within our field because of this. And that's why burnout is the way it is, as far as the rates of burnout for us. So it's really important for self-care as well, to be able to do things for ourselves so as to not take on too much. As far as our treatment planning, when we are treatment planning, what you're going to see time and time again, especially when you move on to a specific facility or a site, is that there's a need to identify measurable goals. Has anyone heard of this concept before? Would anyone be able to give me an example? Go ahead, Tina. Yeah.
So you're talking like a SMART goal then?
Correct. Yep.
Where so the client will be able to identify 5 triggers that causes their symptoms of depression within, 8 consecutive visits, or, so you have to have a time frame and how many they're going to achieve or be able to identify, whether it be like identify, demonstrate, or utilize.
Perfect. Yes, that's exactly it. And so what you're going to see when you move to practicum and internship, something that we're going to look at here and now as well, is that the way in which we're establishing our treatment plan goals and objectives, they have to be identifiable, just like Tina mentioned. So we're naming them. We're going to measure them by quantifying them. And then we're giving a timeline so as to reflect on when we get to the next treatment plan goal, treatment plan update. And so we want to go back and be able to measure them, say if this has been completed or not, and then if they have not been completed, we're going to be extending them. It's exactly right, just as Tina mentioned. And that goes with regards to our trigger identification, our coping skill identification, and our relapse prevention, and any other aspect of treatment planning is going to pertain to this as well. So that could be emotional regulation, that can be practicing mindfulness techniques, it's going to be relating to journaling, or whatever treatment plan goal and objective that you establish with your client. Now, something that's really touchy, especially recently, from 2020 onwards, things that we thought we put to bed are not put to bed, especially with racial tension, police brutality, especially around the murder of George Floyd. All of these touchy topics are extremely sensitive with regards to race, sexuality, financial concerns. Physical health is a hot topic right now, especially with vaccinations and ex-vaccinators and with COVID and the belief in science and the non-belief in science. And so these are all very uncomfortable topics, especially if you don't co-sign into any of these ideologies. So being able to mitigate and sort of work through whatever it is that your client presents to then find some sort of common ground to work from is really important. And so we're not sitting here saying, believe in everything that our client is saying so that you can have some sort of efficacious result. But what we are saying is you should be prepared to deal with folks that may be from the opposite end of the spectrum than you. And that's okay. And not to hold those personal and not be able to work with individuals. Because I don't think it's legal or ethical for us to turn anyone away based off of just a different ideology. So what we are going to be trying to see in your videos is your ability to work with anyone from any paradigm, from anyone on the spectrum, so as to be able to find some sort of common ground and show that empathy and show that care to be able to try and get them to where they see themselves, right? So as far as logical consequences, confrontation, and challenge, I know a lot of your textbooks and some of the information that you've seen already has explored this. Can anyone give me an example of a logical consequence or scenario that would provoke this or the need for this? If not, I have one. No worries. So a logical consequence. So sometimes it's referred to, especially in the realm of substance use disorders, as playing the tape out. You'll hear that a lot in the rooms. This is applicable to co-occurring mental health and strictly substance use disorders as well. It's pretty much laying out the groundwork for what if an if-then scenario. So if someone is to go out and pick up their drug of choice and use, you're playing the tape out and walking them through the logical consequences of that action in your session. Simultaneous of that, like if it's a mental health scenario, you're doing the same thing. So, if an individual is coming in saying that they don't want to, or if they come in saying that they don't want to do specific X, Y, and Z, however, have this urge or craving, or it's a programmed action. So what is that like for them? What is it that's going to occur if they do that one specific behavior that they're trying to avoid doing? And you're walking through what the consequences would look like. Confrontation versus challenging. Here's a scenario that comes up repeatedly. In the realm of substance use disorders, it could be mental health as well. You're going to see individuals come in and do a specific behavior, maybe even in front of you, maybe even within a session. So something that I've seen time and time again is an individual will come in for counseling, and you see them repeatedly, maybe 3 to 5 sessions. In every session, you see the same pattern of events. They come in, they sit down, they go outside your office for a quick second saying they have to use the restroom. They go out, they use the restroom, they come back into your room, they shut the door, they sit on your couch, and all of a sudden you see them nodding out. And they do this 3 to 5 sessions in a row. If you were in that scenario, would you choose to challenge? Would you choose to confront? What would you do?
I would probably confront.
Okay. And what type of language would you use in that confrontation?
I would probably just kind of mention how I've noticed over the past couple sessions, it seems that we have gotten into a routine. So I'm not specifically pinpointing it on the client, but how we together have gotten into a routine. You come in, we start the session, you need to use the restroom, you leave, and then you come back and your demeanor's completely changed. You're nodding off now. So what's going on while we're using the restroom? So I think I would just kind of come at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a valid response, definitely. Would anyone do anything differently? Would anyone not confront or challenge? Because all are acceptable options. Yeah, I mean, you could choose to do any one of the 3, and it really depends on how you're interpreting that specific client and what you think would benefit that client most. In some instances, confrontation may put that person in a scenario where, they'd be offset or off-put or feel challenged so that they may disengage in counseling. And that's a risk that we may have to take, right? In other instances, allowing for the client to continue may feel like enabling. And so maybe we wouldn't want to do that. But these are all interpretive situations. And it's up to us to be able to be intuitive enough in that moment to basically figure out exactly what you think would benefit the client most in that moment, right? Self-disclosure, go ahead, Delaney.
Could you, in that scenario, could you give an example of a challenge? Because that was a great confrontation, but could you give a specific example of a challenge?
Yeah. Would anyone care to share first? That's okay. So what I would do is I would say something on the lines of, it seems like every situation that you come in, you're paying out of pocket for this service. What is it that you hope to achieve in coming in here every session, paying out of pocket? Or how can I better assist you if you're paying out of pocket and this is kind of what's happening, right? Or what is it that you hope? Yeah, I mean, I think hope to achieve is the best way to kind of appropriately pitch it, I guess. That would be my response on the spot. Sorry. When it comes to self-disclosure, so there's a lot of politics around self-disclosure. Some folks subscribe to it, some folks don't. It depends on the school of thought that you're in. So recounting your own personal lived experience is all about self-disclosure. And so when it comes in the realm of substance use disorders, folks are often talking about their lived experience and the triumph of them obtaining their recovery. When it comes to specific trauma, I've heard of some of my peers will recount their own lived trauma and successfully getting through whatever trauma it was, so as to show their receiving client that you can persevere through and be resilient through all of which is happening in the present moment. I personally can't teach what is the correct method. Oftentimes the books are saying it's frowned upon whenever a session is encompass more of your material than it is the client's material. That is said to be not ethical. And so we have to use that intermittently if you choose to use it. My mentors always told me offer the least amount of material about yourself as possible. And that's the cleanest way to go about your counseling sessions, and that's something that I subscribe to. But you really need to gauge exactly what do you think is the ultimate purpose and the ultimate moment of sharing this information, with the awareness that this information is going out to someone and could potentially be shared out into the public world. So just be mindful and cognizant of that as well. So we do want to see you use all of these skills, if at all is possible, throughout your videotapes as we progress through this weekend. As it comes to treatment planning and SOAP notes and DAP notes, as Dr. Spinks mentioned, we are going to be looking at how you are able to construct your SOAP note and your DAP note, and make sure that your notes are in accordance with the clinical records, legal standards, ethical standards, and then also your state and agency procedures, because all of this all of your documentation technically is part of a legal document that is binding. And so we have to be very respectful of it and be mindful of it, and just ensure that it is up to par, because again, it's going to the insurance company and it's being billed for. So we just want to be mindful of that, because also if you are doing that fraudulently, your license is at stake at that point, right? When it comes to culture, this is a very important concept to be mindful of. The theories that we are being taught in the introduction of most of your theoretical orientation books, they're talking about how these specific theories were actually tailored and written for the cardinal demographic of white middle-class males. And so we need to be mindful that these specific theories may not be suited for everyone across the board. Clearly, with diversity and with different cultures and backgrounds, there's a lot more than just white middle-class males in America. So we need to be able to adapt the interventions accordingly, and use them in conjunction with other modalities if we have them, to be able to reach our client on the other end of the spectrum. And the case in point, I'll use myself, for example, first generation Indian male. I come from a really small state called Punjab in North India. Men don't really talk about feelings at all. And so if I were to go into counseling, my counselor would probably need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, there's a disconnect between our cognition and our emotion. And, you know, concepts that mimic kind of what's found in Costa Rica and Latin America with machismo are very much paramount in Indian culture as well. And so being able to relay that information so that the counselor could adapt to it, be able to use and fine tune specific theories and modalities, maybe integrate different approaches that might be more efficacious for someone of my cultural background is really important. So being able to be mindful of those cultures and that cultural nuance is also going to be really paramount. So when you do your videos, feel free to keep that in mind as well, okay? That is everything I had to present today, but I did want to make mention of this document that Dr. Spinks posted up. This is on your course announcements. This goes over kind of very briefly what we covered just now, with a few more nuances with solar, which I think Lainey, you mentioned too, with regards to our posture. So make sure we have an open stance, make sure we don't have anything separating or in our way from ourselves and our clients, being open, leaning in, showing active listening, making sure our nonverbals are present, and also showing a relaxed demeanor. But I think that's everything that we had to cover, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you for your cooperation throughout this, and thanks, Dr. Spinks.
Cap, would you like your feedback recorded as well, or no?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Okay, all right. All right, everyone, let's give it up for Cap. Let's show him some love. You can do that either by applause, or there's the reactions down below. That's how we give love throughout this course experience. So, Cap, are you ready to receive some gifts?
Yes, please.
All right, and we'll start with you. What did you do well?
I think I gave decent examples. I think I was able to integrate the material in a way that was relatable. And I hope I covered everything. I know it was short on time, so I got through as much material as possible, and I tried to tie topics together so as to get more of them done.
All right. If anything, what would you, if anything, what would you like to do differently if you could?
Yeah. I would like to be able to try and be more calm throughout. I feel like the nerves got to me at some points and I was scatterbrained. And then also with the being on the spot and trying to think of a really good, poignant challenge was difficult for me because I know the nerves got to me.
Oh, so when Delaney asked the question, that kind, yeah.
It was a great question. I just was not ready.
Right. Well, hey, that's part of the process. I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
owning that. All right. Colleagues, now this is an opportunity for you to give Cap some gifts, and we'll start with what he did well.
I can go.
Okay.
Okay. I thought his voice was very clear and calm. I thought he was easy to listen to. He was quite knowledgeable. I love that he included the stats. That's always helpful and paints a clear picture. I also wrote that he was great with the examples that he gave us, and it was relatable. So I really enjoyed it. I thought you did a great job, Kat.
Thanks.
Right, Joanne, thank you. Who's next?
I'll go. I wanted to say that along with Joanne, I really appreciated the statistics that you incorporated. And I really like the situations and like the case conceptualizations. Myself, I love like case studies and all. So I really appreciated that. And I really appreciated how you put everybody kind of on the spot. Like, okay, well, yes, you identified this, but now what would you do next with that? So I know that caught me off guard, but I appreciate that.
Cool. Thanks.
Mhm.
Was that
I
Takesha?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I appreciated your real world language. It was definitely data driven, but I appreciated your scenario. For example, when you were talking about a real or a hypothetical client and you said nodding off. I think that was an excellent, way that it doesn't have to always be so clinical and so, precise in that manner, but that, it's a disengagement that's happening. Yes, but they're nodding off. And so it's painted the picture well for me to be able to develop a scenario.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. Yeah.
I just want to say I thought you did a great job. As has already been said, that you presented a lot of information very well, and I loved the way you kept us involved by asking us questions throughout the presentation.
Cheers. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's hard to do that when you're in a virtual setting like this, and everybody's sort of deferring. We're still early, and I thought you did a nice job of waiting long enough and then acknowledging and at least for me, you validated what was said and then you built upon it, which I think was really helpful.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
I'm going to echo that as well, because I noticed, I even heard you tapping. So we're limited with you sharing your screen. We're limited of how many people we can view at one time. And so I could hear you tapping to make sure that nobody else is raising their hand or they're not being overlooked. So I really appreciated that because that can be very challenging. And then again, my analytical brain loves statistics, loves statistics. So throwing that out there, it wasn't overwhelming. Some people are like, and it really wasn't. I thought it was a nice balance to it. And the fact that you asked us first, rather than just saying the answer, like that was a teaching moment that you really exemplified right there. And I really appreciated that.
Oh, nice. Thanks.
All right. If anything, what would you like to see CAP do differently? Remember, we grow from affirmation, but also what we can do differently.
I'll go ahead and start since I went last. For me, I think that just ending it with an opportunity for more open questions. That's what I would have taken from it.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Cap?
I appreciate the gift. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
No, I wish I did that. I honestly do. Now that I'm thinking about it, I really appreciate that.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyone else?
I have a simple one. At one point, I couldn't see the rest of the document as you were talking about the rest of the skills. And as a visual and an auditory learner, it would have been helpful to see the bottom half of the document while you were speaking about the skills.
I agree with that. I appreciate the gift. Yes, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Lisa, you're up.
Sure. Again, I think your strength was, I think you did a nice job asking what folks in the room knew already, and then building on that. I always think that's a nice way to teach and to take in everybody's expertise, because there is expertise in the room. And I echo what Lainey said too, because I was just like, what part are we on? Because I like to see and hear too. So yeah, just continuing to scroll down. So, and I would have asked one last time other questions.
Thank
You
you
didn't
for the
seem nervous
gift.
to me though. I thought you seemed very confident. So just,
I can tell
you'll
you
see
what
that
I
in the
do.
video too. You'll see that you seem just fine. Just fine.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I do want to say, I think you did good. Me personally, I've been more nervous, but I think that, you know, you sounded professional, you know, you stayed on task, and you was giving us some examples, some things to think about, which that kind of helped me too, because, you know, some of the skills I may have struggled with. So, you know, actually saying it and then giving an example behind it, I think that was pretty good. I do got to agree with the scrolling, because I was writing at the same time. You know, I'm kind of more, I write a lot to kind of remember things. So, yeah, I think the scrolling and the other screen threw me off a little bit because I was kind of a little bit trying to read and listen to you. But overall, I think you did a good job, especially with explaining some things and getting them to think. Like when you ask the question about the caring and empathy and stuff, you know, it gets people more thinking, and they may have not have thought about it if, you know, not have been asked.
So the
Thank
second
you.
screen you're talking about, Shatar, is the notes. That was your notes, Cap, on the side of the screen you're sharing.
I'm not sure I know what you're seeing on your side. Do you see the expected pre-prac skills on the left and then my notes on the right?
Yes.
Okay. So I was scrolling, I was trying to keep it so that you would be can you see my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping that you all would be seeing this, and then I'm assuming Zoom is right here for you all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was trying to scroll slowly through here, but I probably should have enunciated that, hey, I'm reading from this side if you need to take notes, and then scrolled slower.
Gotcha.
But that's definitely helpful critique. I appreciate that.
But I think what she's saying is that all the information on this side of the slide, which was for you, may be distracting for some folks because they're trying to listen to you and read all of that at the same time.
Understood.
So you might want to be mindful of that. Okay. All right. And by the way, Cap, could you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. I just realized we're not all seeing each other. Okay. All right. So I have some gifts for you. I absolutely, like your colleagues, I absolutely love the stats, and I like the fact that you kind of raise the attention from the beginning. Like, these are very important, and here's why. Clients aren't coming back, right? So, you know, you're in this profession because you want to provide support to people. They have to be in the seat or on the screen, and the way that you use these skills is important to having them as your client. So I appreciated that. I think that you're very student focused. You're very affirming. I think that you used good personal examples and stories from real life situations. I think your substance abuse examples were good and pertinent because we're all going to deal with folks who have co-occurring conditions. I really appreciated the case conceptualization and getting them already to start thinking about how you understand what's going on with the client, then how it applies to your skills and treatment planning. I appreciated that. Telehealth, I think that you really poured into that and how important that is for the future, because for, if you're not going to be into telehealth, you may have a challenge, supporting yourself in 10 years, because that will probably be the norm. And there's a lot of benefits, a lot of folks, because of stigma, and especially in Black and Brown communities, LGBT plus communities, don't want to go to a place that it either says mental health or that population, right? So you can meet people, in their living rooms. So it opens up the gamut. So there's a lot of benefits and a lot of struggles that come along with it. I love the discussion around empathy versus caring. I appreciated that. I think we need to have more discussions like that. And so I'm happy that you were mindful of that. And I think that you answered questions well. I didn't see Delaney throwing you off with that question. That must have been an internal process. I thought you handled it well. And I loved your overall approach to this particular presentation. It was different than I've seen before. Most students just come and do this slideshow presentation. I like the fact that you were much more engaging and you kind of approached it from a case conceptualization and treatment planning approach. I appreciated that. In terms of what I would like to see differently, and this is some teachable moments for everyone, watch asking multiple questions at one time. So think about what you really want to ask and tell yourself, I can only ask one question. What do I need to ask the students or my client? Because we can easily ask 3 or 4 questions because we're trying to formulate in our head what we really want to ask. So it's okay to take a moment, think about what question you want to ask and ask one question. I would say, Cap, I don't think you were right on time. So you could have went a little bit over, but I got the impression that you felt like you were under the gun with the time. So I put slow down. I think that I don't normally think you talk fast, but it may be that you had some little anxiety. And usually when we have anxiety, we tend to talk faster, most of us. So just be mindful of that. If you hear yourself talking fast, just take a couple of breaths and slow down. That will be helpful for you all too. Also, I think that you have a pretty robust vocabulary and you've been in the field for a while. So a lot of the terminology that you may have used, they may not know. Right. So just be mindful of some of that and break some of those words down that you utilize. There was quite a few of them. I wrote several of them down, which I knew what they were, but I'm not sure everyone did if they have not been in the field. So just be mindful, and that goes for all of us when we use our terminology with clients, or we want to make sure that they're aware of actually what we're saying. Also, I put on here, ask more open-ended questions and check in more. You gave a lot of information. So, after every paragraph or two, I would encourage you to check in with them. What questions do you have? I think a couple times you just said, do you have any question, or does that make sense? I can't, something like that. So I encourage everyone to get in the habit of saying, what questions do you have? All right, that opens it up more than just yes or no. And then watch saying you're sorry. Yeah, at one point you said, at one point you said you were, I'm sorry, I'm in substance abuse, I think you. So my focus is substance abuse. So there's nothing to be sorry about. That's expertise and we need them. And you all, I thought that was a good teachable moment for all of us. When you're in front of, unless you make a mistake and offend someone, you don't have to be sorry about any expertise or anything that you've done. So just be mindful of that. The case conceptualization was excellent, but the first one was kind of long. So it might have been good if you would have had a handout or something visual for the visual learners in the group. So that's more of a facilitation thing. I would have liked at some points when you posed a question, or maybe when you talked about, a new content area, just to stop and pause, use silence more. Let them kind of absorb and marinate, so that you can see if they have any questions or if they want to really contribute to the discussion. One other part you talked about the videos being graded. And I would encourage you to consider being assessed rather than graded. Whenever you use the term graded, people freak out. I don't know what the technical term would be, but I try to stay away from graded. And I often say assessed because it's easier for people to be assessed than graded. There tends to be judgment with graded. So just something that's really a preference thing. But I thought it would be something useful to share with you. I put on here breakdown concepts. I would have loved for maybe just a moment when you covered the difficult conversation. You talked about George Floyd and race, maybe to check in with them what makes those conversations so difficult, right? Because race, sexual orientation, gender, and money and sex, you can't get away from those conversations. So I have a student now currently, an intern who has issues and some challenges having conversations around sex. And our very first client was there because he is experiencing, what's the word? Just totally slipped my mind. Erectile dysfunction. So her entire first session was about his genitalia and the fact that it doesn't work and how it's impacted. And she was just, so we have to have these conversations. There's no way around them. And the more that we have the discussion about why they're so difficult, the easier they become, right? Especially around race and sexual orientation, those types of things. And then lastly, when it comes to self-disclosure, you kind of talked about your mentors and you gave one perspective about, really not sharing that much, but from a multicultural perspective and working with underserved, oppressed groups, if you don't share anything, that folks aren't coming back. So it depends on what group that you're serving. And especially working with my clients who are predominantly Black and Brown, if I never shared anything about myself, they're not gonna go for that. Because they're asking questions like, have you ever dealt with anything like this? Because they're trying to find validity in my approach, not only from a degree. In some communities, the degree is not so important, it's your experience, right? So I think that just having maybe talking about both sides of the coin when it comes to self-disclosure. Of course, I'm not talking about where you're talking more about yourself in the session, it becomes your counseling session, but just using your personal experiences as a way to connect and also to allow the client to feel that you have empathy because you've experienced something similar, right? And even if it's not the similar experience, it's a similar emotion behind the experience. But overall, I thought you did an excellent job. I loved your approach. Let's give it up for Cap one more time. Give him some love. All right, excellent job. And I will stop